Welcome to But What About Me, a career success podcast dedicated to giving a voice to underrepresented populations, or UPs, and helping each navigate their career to reach their highest potential. This podcast is brought to you by jennifertardy.com. Welcome to another episode of But What About Me? I am your host, Jennifer Tardy, and today's guest is the phenomenal Lisa Rosser. Now, Lisa talks to us about the value veterans bring to the workforce, and what a better time for this talk because it's in alignment to Veterans Day. Now, Lisa provides career motivation and advice in this episode to military veterans who are seeking employment. Her overall mission is to help organizations improve their veteran and recruiting programs. So I couldn't think of a better person to have on today's show to provide this advice. Now, in this episode, Lisa covers several topics, including what you should do before creating your resume. Yes, there are a few things that you need to think about, veterans. She also talks about how to translate your resume for civilian employers. We talk about ways you can combat stereotypes and stigmas. And she even shares career advice for military partners and spouses. We talk about companies who are known for going above and beyond for military veterans. And we even have a really good conversation about veterans who may have dishonorable discharge and what Lisa's recommendation is for them as they're seeking employment. So a little bit about Lisa. Lisa is a 20-year HR professional and a military vet who spent 22 years in the active Army and the Army Reserve. In 2007, she combined these backgrounds and founded a training and consulting firm called The Value of a Veteran. Through training, consultation, and change management practices, she helps companies understand what military veterans have to offer, how to align military talent with civilian positions, and how to market positions and source and retain veterans. She has worked with over 300 large corporations to design and implement effective veteran recruitment programs that get results. And I can truly attest to the value that her training program was, because I went through it myself several years ago, and it's completely thorough and it's everything that she says it is. So Lisa's military experience coupled with her expertise in HR makes her the perfect person to lead us into this discussion about how veterans can take charge of their career. Yes, we're talking to you, so stay tuned, veterans. This one is for you. Well, welcome, Lisa. Thank you for being on the But What About Me podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. It's an election day. We're all ready to vote. It's all good.
Perfect. And so we're talking about a population today that I love knowing about and talking about. And one of the things that I was mentioning to you right before we started recording is how much I attribute my learning to just the information that you've put out there, the trainings, the courses that you've put out there. And so I appreciate you for that. You have a lot of information around this. So for those who may not know the audience that we're talking to today, let's break it down. We're talking to military veterans. In your own words, what and who are military veterans?
Well, and the more obvious definition is obviously that anyone who has served their country or is currently serving their country, either on active duty or National Guard or reserves. And so we want to make sure that we count those who have served in the past, even though some of them may not take on the mantle of calling themselves veterans for a variety of reasons. But we want to be as inclusive as possible. And so, yes, if you have served any amount of time in the military, we're counting those as veterans. And we want to support our military spouses as well, our family members. But today I think we're going to focus really on those who have actually served.
Absolutely. And so of those who've served, how large of a population would we estimate this being in the U.S.?
It's huge. We've got about 1.3 million people currently serving in uniform. So that includes active guard and reserves. But then there's, close to 8 or 9 million, I think, that are have recently served, are, within a working age, job eligible age, because obviously there's plenty more veterans that are outside of the job eligible age, but again, focusing on those who might be looking for employment, there's still millions out there that have served and are either currently working or looking for work. So we always like to promote the skills and the attitudes and traits that they'll bring with them to the workforce.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. And you and I were talking right before we started recording, and you had mentioned that you have been doing this for 11 years. You've been doing this work. Where did this passion originate for you?
It was kind of an interesting mix. Back in 2006 is when this really started. I was working for another company at the time. I have a background in human resources and recruiting and diversity program development. And at that time, the veteran unemployment rate was 23%. And the kind of media attention around that unemployment rate had to do a lot with, okay, these guys and gals are coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. They don't have college degrees, they don't have marketable skills, they have injuries and illnesses, and a good number of them may have PTSD. And so, there's no hope, basically, is kind of the messaging that was going on out there. And at that point, I had been in the military 16 years. I did 10 years active duty and ultimately 12 in the reserves. So I was in my reserve time at that point. And it's like, that's not the service member I've served with. I know exactly how talented this group is. I know how they're assessed. I know how hard it is to actually join the military and what you have to do to kind of prove your attitude and aptitude to be able to learn a skill. And so I knew the skills were marketable. We just call them different things. And it's just a real challenge, I think, sometimes for civilians to wrap their mind around, what this person could bring to the table. And as the military, we haven't done a great job of helping service members really understand how to package themselves. Mm-hmm. So that's exactly what we were seeing at that point. So I felt like, I'm in a position where I can make a difference. The question is, what difference do I want to make? Do I want to help service members, package themselves better, or do I want to work with employers and try to get the civilians to understand the military a little bit better? So that's been my focus for 11 years, is really working directly with the corporations and helping them to understand military culture, military skill sets, how to recruit, how to retain. But I have come across, just as a natural component of what I do, many, many service members who are either transitioning out or who have been out for a while seeking employment and looking for advice.
And so they're coming to you quite often to get some advice on how to gain employment. So when they're coming to you in this example, what are some of the challenges that you tell them up front that they could potentially face transitioning from the military into civilian employment?
There's a lot of challenges, and they recognize the most immediate one, which is, how do I translate what it is that I've done in the military and have it make sense to someone who has no military experience. And that's something that the services do try to help them with. But for me, it's an even bigger challenge, I think, that they don't know what they don't know. They know most of them have entered the military right out of high school or right out of college. And so they may not have ever worked anywhere else before, certainly not in a full-time capacity. So they know what the military taught them and how that skill is used in the military, and they've never had to explain it to anybody. And now you're going out into the big wide world of civilian work where your skill sets might be used in very different ways depending on the company, depending on the industry, but you don't know that. And so you don't know what to look for. You don't know what kind of companies might utilize your skill set, or you're making assumptions that, oh, well, why would I ever want to go work for the insurance industry? I don't want to go sell insurance. And it's like, okay, if you knew cybersecurity, IT, if you knew anything about, the skilled trades, mechanics and things like that, or nursing, there's so many things you could do in the insurance industry that has nothing to do with selling insurance. But you may be dismissing it out of hand because all you think you know about the insurance industry is that they sell insurance. So it's how do we educate service members, or how do service members, kind of take action and learn to educate them and apply in different places.
Okay. And so when people are saying to you that, okay, so they're saying, you're right, I don't know how to translate my skills. Where's the first place you send them to learn how to do that so that it's not so overwhelming to them? where would you recommend that they go, or how would you recommend they start?
Well, what I tell them is don't just like try to start writing a resume, because that's typically what they're being told to do in the transition assistance class. And it's like the resume is like step 5 or 6. What my first piece of advice is literally make a master skills list. Everything you've ever done in the military, every little small job you've had, big jobs you've had, what are the skills truly entailed in there? Have you ever had to read blueprints? Have you ever read schematics? Do you know how to create a project plan? Do you know how to do a budget? Anything, and put it all in your master skills list. And then from there, some things are going to be very easily translated, and other things you're going to have a really hard time trying to figure out, well, what would this look like in a civilian capacity? So start with the master skills list, and then you can start using some of the tools to help you translate better, what an infantryman might know how to do. If you just walk in and say, well, I'm an infantryman, what you got? That's
right.
Yeah, no one's gonna, unless they've been prepared, the employers are gonna be like, I don't know. So it's like you have to be able to understand, the things that you bring to the table. Like, you have great leadership skills, you've got organizational, you work with teams, emergency management, how to create, emergency plans and things like that. So putting all of that together and having that as part of your master skills list, then you can take pieces and parts out of the skills list and build a resume that's appropriate for the jobs that you're applying to, rather than just sort of dumping everything you've ever done in the military into a 3 or 4 page resume and hoping someone understands what that resume is trying to tell them. They're not. You're going to have to customize it.
So putting back on your HR hat, right? Let's suppose one of our servicemen or women, they're transitioning out and they decided to dump all of their information from, when they in active duty. They decided to dump it on their resume, and now you receive it as an employer who hasn't been trained to understand. What would you tell that job seeker that experience would be from your perspective?
If they don't take the time to customize it, what the challenges
are, the consequences. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. And it also depends on, are you applying to, let's say, a larger employer or a little small, mom and pop shop that maybe only has 10 or 15 employees in it. If it's a small company, you have a greater chance of actually maybe walking in the door and talking to someone about what you know how to do. But chances are you're applying to probably a larger company. Right. Many companies these days use what are called applicant tracking systems. And so they require you to apply online, submit your resume online, fill out all this information online. And the first, entity that's actually looking at your resume is a computer algorithm. It's not a set of human eyes looking at this resume. And so it's, set up to look for very specific things. So if you're not using the magic keywords in there, and who knows what the magic keywords are for that company, if you didn't use them, your resume kind of gets screened out automatically. So think about if you've ever applied for a job and 30 seconds later, you got the rejection notice, thank you for applying, you don't meet our criteria. And you're like, how in the world, did you read my resume that fast? They didn't. The computer read it. If you're lucky enough to get past the algorithm and something, continues to move you down the line, now you're looking, hopefully a recruiter is looking at this same resume. Well, they're looking at it almost as fast as the algorithm. I've seen many recruiters, scan a resume in literally less than 30 seconds. And if they don't see what they're looking for in those 30 seconds, reject. It's just easy they're looking for reasons to exclude you, because they're getting hundreds, of resumes for this open position. They need a reason to exclude you. And if they can't understand it, that's an easy reason to exclude you. And then they can narrow it down to maybe the, 15 or 20 or whatever resumes they do understand and that look like good candidates. And those will be the ones that actually move forward to someone who's going to make decisions on whether or not you get interviewed for this position. So that's the consequences. If you don't customize the resume, if you don't make it targeted to the position you're applying for, you just sort of put that generic resume out, send it 200 places, and they're very, very different jobs you're applying for. There's a reason why you're not getting calls back.
And you just hit on a pain point, because I tell job seekers in general constantly that a recruiter is not going to spend time trying to decipher your resume, trying to make it make sense. If it doesn't easily jump out at that recruiter that you are qualified for this position, they will keep it moving. And you said it just right. They're looking for reasons to exclude you. They only have a limited amount of time and hundreds of resumes are coming through. So that yes, absolutely. I'm glad that you pointed that out. And you mentioned something earlier in the conversation, which connected to your passion, why you decided to do this work, and how military veterans were portrayed in, the media, publications, wherever, and you wanted to shift that. So that brings me to a conversation about what this population of job seekers has to navigate, the unconscious biases, any stigmas, any stereotypes. If someone were coming to you saying, hey, Lisa, what can I expect that I'm going to have to navigate as a military veteran, what would you say?
Well, I think, some of the more negative things that have come out are, it ends up being word of mouth. You hear about it, you read about it, you don't know if it's actually true. But if anybody says they've experienced it, we all sort of embrace it as like, that's what it must be like out there. And one of the bigger kind of myths, if you will, is, oh yeah, a lot of companies like to label themselves as veteran friendly, but I submitted my resume and I got rejected, so therefore they're not military friendly. And it's like, okay, well, that could be one of two things. Maybe maybe you just weren't qualified for the position, or there is certainly some, element of companies slapping the label military friendly on themselves without making to educate their recruiters and hiring managers on how to read the resumes, how to interpret military service. So at this point, though, you don't know which of those situations you're going into. So what I would tell the service member is, number one, don't assume, that if you saw the label military friendly on there, that necessarily means one thing or the other. Does it necessarily mean, then I should be guaranteed to get a job at this company? Because there's no guarantees out there. And two, you don't really know, how well prepared this company is. But don't dismiss it either. Don't sit there and say, oh, that's just, garbage, and there's no companies out there that do that. Because there are plenty of companies out there that really do make a concerted effort, who train their recruiters and hiring managers, and who would be willing to kind of work with you and navigate through that. So, approach it cautiously, but don't either, 100% expect it to land a job for you, and don't dismiss it out of hand either. So that would be maybe number one on that. And number two is for the service member, it's like, you really have got to take ownership of this transition. I think sometimes we rely too much on, the bunch of companies out there want to recruit veterans, so I don't have to do anything. I just got to show up and I'm a veteran, what kind of jobs do you have for me? And it's like, it still doesn't work that way. As I don't care how military friendly a company is, that's the wrong attitude. And that's not going to do you any favors. So you really still have to, educate yourself about these companies. If you're going to a job fair and you've, seen 10 companies that maybe would be interesting for you, you have to do a little bit of work. You really do have to try and learn what that industry is, what kinds of jobs are available to them, so that when you go up and talk to them, you've got something specific to talk about. And I see that too often, as they walk up and they're like, well, I don't know what this company does. We all have the magic phone in our pocket, right? You can just while you're standing in line waiting to talk to the recruiter, you could literally be looking up what this company does. And then even if it's sort of like learning to speak another language, even if you make an attempt, to speak their language, that shows interest. And then the company's like, oh yes, well here, let me explain that a little bit better. Here's what we actually do, but good start. And let's have the conversation from there. I would like to see them do a little bit more proactive work in trying to prepare themselves.
So that was a good perspective on what job seekers, where they may be thinking about employers. But what about some thoughts that you've seen employers thinking about veteran job seekers that these job seekers need to be prepared for by way of stereotypes and stigmas that may be attached to transitioning out of the military?
And there certainly are employers that, maybe have attempted to recruit military in the past, or, we had one military guy that worked for us in the past, and maybe that person, for whatever reason, didn't work out. And so that's sort of stuck in their mind as like, yeah, we tried that once and that didn't work so well. And so now kind of every service member that comes through the door gets painted with
Yeah.
that, with that perspective. And it's like, okay, just like you can't say, well, we hired a woman once and, that didn't work out, so we're never going to hire a woman again. You can't do that. Everybody's different, and who knows what that person was going through at the time. So we have to keep an open mind. We can't make assumptions that, just because they don't have a college degree means they're, somehow worthless in this respect. It's like what they have is a lot of work experience, and they've had a lot of opportunities to do things that maybe your average, typical college student who went right from high school to college and into the workforce has never had to work through. They've never had to, take over and lead or supervise a project. They've never had to deal in austere environments. They've never had to deal with, just not having all the time, resources, and things that they need to accomplish a job, and yet they still had to accomplish the job. And so service members have had a lot of practice at that. So again, we want to figure out how can we capitalize on that and not make assumptions that, well, he doesn't have a degree, he doesn't have a skill that I recognize when I, look at this resume, so I'm just looking for a reason not to talk to them, versus why don't I, have a conversation with this person, and why don't I talk a little bit about, the job I'm trying to fill requires this. Have you ever had to do something like that? Tell me about it, and then let them tell you how they've been in a situation that was very similar and what they did. And then you might be like, you know what? You're right. I don't need a 4-year degree. I need someone who has spent 3 years doing that. And then that will make a great candidate for me.
Makes sense. Got it. And so, so if there's a person who is about to transition out, oftentimes our human nature is we're not doing a lot of career planning. And so we have to start doing it, which oftentimes can be too late. When would you advise someone transitioning out of the military to begin career planning? And is there any support for that?
There's a saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? 50 years ago. When's the next best time? Today. Because it takes time to do these kind of things. So yeah, I mean, I honestly don't understand why the services don't make service members from day one of entering the military start planning for their exit, because they are going to leave. When we join the military, we're under contract. So we're going to leave the service at some point, either through downsizing, disability, just, end of our contract, whatever, we will go. So why do we wait until 30 days before it's time to leave to go, oh, let's, give you a fire hose of information and make you try to figure out how to explain yourself. So, until the military figures out to do that, I, again, want the service members to take ownership of that. You will leave the service at some point. So every time you finish a job, you should be sitting down and writing out, what skills did I pick up in this particular job? Did I just kind of, get more advanced in being a mechanic, but now I've actually added supervisory skills, or have I done now quality assurance type work? So maybe I should write that down. And again, just for the sake of having fun with this, let's look at what kind of jobs are available out there right now that maybe need that kind of skill set. Are there some magic words that I'm seeing in those job descriptions that maybe I should make little notes in the margins? It's like, here's how I should describe that skill set. So that way it's fresh in your mind when you're going through that exercise. And then you can put it away for 6 months or a year or whatever until you finish the next job. And then pull that sheet of paper out again and start making your notes based on what you've learned in this next job. So that way it's not so daunting when the time comes to finally leave the service, that you're not trying to rack your brain over 30 years worth of experience, or even if it's just, 10 years of experience. What is it that I've done with my life in the last 10 years? What have I learned? What can I do? You can just pull out the sheet that you've been working on. So, if you've been in 10 years now and you're like, oh, crap, Lisa, I'm getting out next year and I haven't started this. It's like, well,
Right.
10 years ago would have been the right time to start, but today is the next best time you can start this process.
Now, do most branches or maybe even bases, do they have some sort of transition assistance program, or is that select?
Most of the really large bases do, and there's 240, I think, transition centers across the globe. So it's, all your big bases are going to have some kind of a program. And they're required to give certain types of classes, like here's resume writing classes, here's a dress for success class, here's an interviewing class. There's a very prescribed curriculum that they have to go through. It's a couple days long. So all service members have to go through that prescribed curriculum. But again, it's a fire hose of information, and oftentimes people wait kind of, closer to the end of, closer to when they're actually leaving to take that class, even though they could take it a year out. Many of them don't necessarily get to do that or choose to do that a year out. So they'll take it maybe 90 days before they leave the service. And then it's like, oh, this fire hose of information is coming at me. I don't know what to do with all of this. And oh, by the way, I've got, 100 other little details. Like if I'm going to move, I need to figure out where I'm moving to, and where am I packing, where's my kids going, and all this kind of stuff. So it's not the most highest priority sometimes if they wait too long to do it. So yes, the services provide this, but it is what it is. It's not necessarily, the guarantee of helping someone get a job, but it's better than nothing, which is what it used to be.
and I've actually had the opportunity to go and to participate in a few of them before. And you're right, it is a hose of information. You mentioned something before that I wanted to go back to about the family of military veterans, especially, the spouses who are in tow. If you could give a piece of advice to them by way of career, what would you say?
Well, if we're talking like the military spouses' careers is what you're specifically asking. Yeah. So there is, of course, a challenge with military spouses and their careers, simply because they, pick up and follow the military member around the world. And so every 2 to 3 years, 4 years, maybe they're picking up and moving. So it's really hard to, get into a career, get any kind of stability, any kind of forward progression. And then the next thing you know, it's time to leave again. So you're spending maybe 6 months on the front end and 6 months on the back end, in that state of moving and not knowing what exactly is going on. So if they're fortunate enough to find a job, then they're dealing with that. Oftentimes they find themselves not fortunate enough to find a job. If a employer looks at that and goes, ooh, military spouse, that means you're leaving, right? In like 2 or 3 years, why would I hire you if we already know that you're going to leave? And it's like, why would you hire anyone? Then if there's no guarantee that anyone's going to be with you at this point for any length of time. So why would we discriminate against spouses just because that's, a likeliness for them? So it is difficult. And oftentimes, especially, depending again on what the spouse does, what the military member does, if they're gone all the time, a lot of the military spouses are like, I can't necessarily have a full-time job, one that requires me to travel a lot because maybe I've got kids, maybe I've got other responsibilities that I can't just, up and leave when there's not another adult in the building. And my family's not nearby. So I don't have the same kind of support structure I might have if we were just settled somewhere else. So, the challenge for them again is trying to find that supportive employer, find that supportive work environment that helps them still be successful, be as employed as long as they possibly can. If it's the kind of employer that has, multiple locations, is there any kind of effort towards, hey, if you move from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Fort Hood, Texas, can we still keep you employed? Is there another office in Texas, or can you be a virtual employee, for whatever period of time? Just thinking kind of creatively on different ways to support that spouse. And he does that.
And what I like as well, too, is that there are a lot of employers that are now advertising that we're not just military friendly, but in addition, we also care about your partners, too. Right. So we have programs for them. And right. So I like that kind of in that direction as well, too. Speaking of companies that are getting it right, so if you had to, just share some names of some companies that are just doing a really good job with hiring and retaining military veterans, who would you say were some really key ones?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of companies out there that are trying to do this well. And, some of them have very creative programs. I like to think about Northrop Grumman. And again, they're a defense contractor, so I don't want people to go, oh, well, they're a defense contractor. Of course, they do it. It's like, no, seriously, they really do go above and beyond. They have a special program called Operation Impact. which is specifically for wounded veterans. So if the service member is severely wounded, I mean, they go above and beyond trying to find and sometimes in certain cases, like create a job, that this person can do for the organization. And if the service member is so severely wounded that they're actually not able to work, they will give that same benefit to the spouse so that the spouse can work and support the family, and knowing, again, that they're there to take care of that service member. So to me, that's really kind of going above and beyond. Yeah. And just because they're a defense contractor, that to me, that really doesn't have anything to do with it, because we're not talking about, oh, you bring some specific skill set, that's defense related. It's treating people, and supporting the military the way that they need to be supported. And really, thinking creatively on how we can do that. How can we structure jobs? How can we, job share? How can we do all these different things that would really make a difference in this service member's life? You've got other companies like, Verizon and Verizon Wireless. They're, trying to do some very similar things in terms of not only supporting service members, but supporting spouses as well, finding the right opportunities for them. Starbucks does that as well. They've got their, many, many more Starbucks are popping up on military installations and near military installations. They're creating military stores that are, almost entirely staffed by former service members, Guard and Reserve, veterans, spouses. And it was one of the things that they had taught us is, when you think of the iconic green apron with the Starbucks logo on it, there's no changing that apron. That is the apron. But the exception is made for the military stores where they have their service written on there. So it might say, Angela, military spouse or something like that. And, they made an exception for those stores to allow the service members to show their pride. And anybody that comes in that store to know, that this is one of those types of stores. So I think that, those types of companies are really making an extra effort.
And this is something that I learned from taking one of your programs, that there are a lot of companies as well, too, that are taking the extra effort of on their career website, they're translating skills. So they're saying that if you were in the military and if you were doing these jobs, here are the type of opportunities that would work well for you at our company too. And I find that really impressive with organizations going above and beyond. So let's talk about something a little tricky here. Okay. And it's around the DD-214s, right? Okay. So some companies may say, okay, if you are coming in from the military as a part of your background check, we want you to turn in your DD-214, and we want you, basically, we want to hire you if you have an honorable discharge. Now, there may be someone out there that's listening, that will be listening to this, that will say, you know what, for whatever reason, I have a dishonorable discharge. What sort of advice can you give them to help them to navigate the job search so that they can also get a job?
Right. So there's 5 different types of discharges. 3 are administrative and 2 are punitive. So the bad conduct discharge and the dishonorable discharge are the punitive ones, and those are the hardest ones to overcome. I mean, there's no getting around those two. And if it's one of those situations where maybe it could have been appealed or something like that, I might almost start with that first, because that is going to be a long road to get past that type of a discharge. However, if the type of discharge that someone received is not the honorable discharge, but it's one of the other 2 administrative discharges, so there's general discharges, there's other than honorable, then those are things that, honestly shouldn't hold you back being hired by employers. So don't assume that it's going to hold you back. Very few employers are going to ask for a DD-214. Very few of them are going to, prove to me that you were, honorably discharged from the military. But certain ones will, if they, like, for some reason, need to get a security clearance for you to come work with them, it may come into play at that point. If they're running a special kind of program, like, Walmart has their program where you do need to be an honorably discharged veteran in order to take advantage of that program. Again, that's not to say you couldn't work for Walmart if you don't have one. It's just you can't be part of that special program that they have. You could still apply and potentially get hired by Walmart. So again, it's just trying to understand what the discharge can hold you back from, and then also understand what it may not be holding you back from. So don't make assumptions that's going to automatically be the case. But if you're in the category of the punitive discharges, start first with seeing if there's any way to get it upgraded in any capacity. I mean, they're not going to take you from bad conduct to honorable, but maybe it could be bad conduct to general, or something in the administrative category that might allow you to move forward with that. If there aren't, like I said, there's other companies that don't care, honestly, don't look for that information. So you might need to redirect some of your efforts toward them.
Okay, that's really good to hear, especially the part of don't assume that just because you have it that you're counted out. There can be other ways into the organization as well too. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. Now, so now let's say that we have a person who is hired and they're working within an organization and they're truly feeling that they're a part of a small population of other people that's underrepresented. What would you recommend to them to help to better embed themselves into the organization or feel more included?
Yeah, I think it's, again, we always want to look for ways in which we have something in common with someone versus the ways that we're separate. Many companies are, trying to start, if not a formal one, at least an informal, veteran employee resource group. So certainly they can align themselves, look for that, see if one exists in the company. If one doesn't exist, there's nothing stopping you from, maybe creating an informal one if you know that there's other veterans that work in your plant or your store or your, whatever facility you work in. But don't limit yourself to that because there's lots of other different groups and organizations that, would also be welcoming and embracing of you. So look for ways that you have something in common. I mean, do you have favorite sports teams? There's probably, different folks in the organization that also love the same sports teams that you do. So look for a way to identify through that. Or, people that like to go out hiking and backpacking or something. Maybe there's a whole group in your organization that likes to do that. Well, then get to know those people, and then you have something in common versus focusing on, well, I'm different because I've had a different life experience and a different work experience. You have, but you have more in common with people than you maybe realize.
Okay. All right. And then what should veterans be aware of when working among people who do not have a military background? Especially, let's consider people who did go right into the military after high school. Now they've been in the military for several years and now they're out. What would you tell them to be on the lookout for?
Well, again, if you're dealing with a group of people that have no familiarity with the military, start from a position of, I'm just going to assume maybe you don't know anything about us versus you are like openly hostile to us. Because I find, again, most people are not openly hostile to someone who has served in the military. They don't look down on you. They don't think badly of you. They just don't know anything about you. Or they don't know anything about military service. So they maybe make assumptions about military service. Again, not from a place of being evil. It's just they don't know any better. So when situations arise where maybe somebody says something kind of, I won't say stupid, but when they say something that's like, okay, that's not an informed opinion on on things military. That number one, don't take it personal. And number two, it's like, this is a teaching moment, right? So this is like, actually, I served in the military and this has been my experience. Or, I know a lot of people who have been through that situation and this is actually a little bit closer to what that experience looks like. So I just wanted to make sure that I shared that with you because I didn't want you to think that that's the way it always is, or that that's how all veterans are. Maybe you've just had that one bad experience, but, now you can have a good experience, because you'll know that not everybody's like that. And just use it as a teaching moment versus getting, defensive about it. And everybody, here hates military and they don't support their Guard and Reserve and, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's too easy to take offense at certain things. Just assume people are maybe just not educated and you have an opportunity now to educate them.
And what you just pointed out was something that a previous guest, Nika White, also mentioned too. She says, assume positive intent. And so we can approach things assuming positive intent. Our response will be a little bit different as opposed to assuming negative intent.
Right.
And so now those are the questions that I had for you. Is there anything that that you want to make sure that if we have someone that's listening to this podcast that is looking for a job or about to be looking for a job that we didn't talk about, is there something that you'd like to say to that person?
Jim, how much time do we have? I think we've covered a lot of the really, good basics on this. I just want service members to really have, hope as they're making their transition from service. That it is different. It's weird. It's, just not what you've ever had to deal with in the last 4 years or 14 years. But it's not impossible. And the more that you really take ownership of this, don't assume that the transition center is going to give you everything you need. Don't assume that the employer is going to, oh, you don't have to translate anything. I know how to read everything. Don't assume that, because that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
But again, look at it as, what can I do to better prepare myself? And if you do encounter that employer that just, for some reason doesn't seem to get it when it comes to military, don't assume the whole company is like that. You're dealing with one person, one recruiter, one hiring manager who maybe that person doesn't get it. But that's not necessarily reflective of the whole company. And so we don't want to paint with a broad brush, oh, this company sucks. They're not, they say they're military friendly, but they're not. Okay, well, maybe you just happened to get that one guy that really didn't know what was going on that day. Give it another shot, go at it from another direction, try to make a different contact, use LinkedIn, make contacts with other veterans who already work for that company and connect with them on LinkedIn and say, hey, I had this experience and I'm just trying to figure out, where did I approach it wrong? Or, what, was that your experience? I mean, you're still working with the company, so I would assume maybe you've had a better experience. So help me. I want to have that experience. I want to come work for this company.
Great advice. Great advice. So where can people find you and what are you up to over there? What's going on in your life?
Well, the main website for my company is called the Value of a Veteran. So started that in 2007. And, that phrase at that time, that phrase was never used, believe it or not, in reference to military service. On the rare occasion it was used, it was mostly in sports terms, like the value of a veteran coach or veteran, center point or whatever. It was not used in a military capacity. And then when I started using it and saying, no, I want you to understand the value of military service, the value of a veteran, now it gets used all the time. And especially like we're coming up on Veterans Day, so it's going to get thrown around a lot here. And I'm fine with that. I'm happy that people are very much using it now for that. So yeah, come to thevalueofaveteran.com, and then you'll learn a little bit more about what I do. I work primarily with the companies. I help them design veteran recruitment and retention programs. But I have branched out in the last year. I'm now offering niche career services for certain classes of service members. So we don't do big generic career fairs. We do very small niche career fairs for 3 different populations. One is student veterans. One is military skilled trades, so your HVAC and plumbers and electricians and construction guys, maintenance guys. And then we do one, or we're launching it next year actually, is for healthcare. So if you have a healthcare background in the military, spouse or service member, then that will be launching next summer. So this was in response really to our clients saying, we're tired of going to big generic career fairs. We need little career fairs that are very concentrated with certain populations. And it's like, all right, tell me what you need and let me see what I can build. And so far, we've gotten a great response from both the service member and the employers on it.
And when I saw that you are now hosting career fairs, I was so excited because I am so when I was leading recruiting teams and we would talk about, okay, so where are we going to go to recruit military veterans? And you have the same types of organizations that are hosting it. And we were never able to find what we were looking for. But I know that this population. And when I saw that you are hosting career fairs, I was really excited. And so,
oh, good. Thank you. Yeah.
Great next.
It's been a fun learning curve, but we're definitely making some inroads. Yeah, it's never that easy putting something together, but we're definitely making some inroads. And I think, just based on past events, the service members really appreciate it. Like we just had a skilled trades event at Fort Hood, and the kids were coming out of the event, and they're just like, oh my God, every employer in that room wanted me. And it's like, isn't that a great feeling when you come in there and it's like you're a mechanic and they're practically fighting over you because every company in the room needs mechanics. And same thing for the employer. It's like, yeah, you're right. There's not 600 people in this room, But if there's 60, 70, 80 people in this room, but they're all what I need,
it's even better.
Win, that was completely worth my time. It was, it was a good thing. So that's what we're trying to create.
Excellent. Excellent. So I am going to wrap up this show the same way I do every other show, with 3 flash questions for you.
Okay.
And no pressure. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I would love if you tell me the first thing that comes to mind for you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Question number 1. It's never too late to
learn a new skill.
I like it. Number 2, I get inspired by
reading.
Okay. And number 3, career success means
that you're excited to get up and go to work in the morning because it's not work. Because it's not work.
That is an awesome way to end the show. Lisa, I appreciate you, and thank you for being a guest.
And thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Be sure to tune in next week because we have so much more in store for you. Until next time, keep going, keep growing, and keep glowing.